Hi guys, welcome back to the channel. My name is Sydney, and if you are new here, this is just a place where we can talk about true crime, weird dark history, spooky scary things, basically anything I got going on in my brain. We sit here and we talk about it. So if that sounds interesting to you, make sure to like and subscribe. But without any further ado, let's get into today's story. So today we're going to be talking about King Tut, his life, and more importantly, his death, and some of the conspiracy theories surrounding his sort of mysterious passing at such a young age. I should note too, before we get into today's story, I'm going to be butchering these names. I'm going to be trying my hardest, but I am probably not going to be pronouncing these names correctly, so please forgive me. So Tutankhamun, or as he's more commonly known, King Tut, was a pharaoh in Egypt starting in 1332 BC. So after the death of the pharaoh before him, who was named Sminkar, again, sorry for the pronunciations, King Tut actually became the pharaoh at a very, very young age. He was 9 years old. Since Tut was only 9 years old when he became the pharaoh, he had two chief advisors that helped him make decisions and did a lot of the behind the scenes work. The first advisor, his name was A, and he was part of the royal family, and he was actually the vizier of Egypt at that time. And his other advisor's name was General Horemheb, and he was in control of the militaries of Egypt. Both of these advisors would actually go on to become pharaohs themselves after King Tut had passed away. So the young king came into power at a time when there was a lot of conflict going on in Egypt. There were sort of disagreements between Egypt and nearby Nubia. Additionally, King Tut's father, whose name was Akhenaten, he believed and he ruled under the idea that there was only one god, and that was the sun god. And this sun god's name was Aten. So people were only allowed to worship the sun god. So during his time as pharaoh, King Tut and his advisors decided to restore some of the shrines and temples that were dedicated to the other gods that had been destroyed when Akhenaten was in power. He also gave the priesthood back their power, as well as just kind of opened up religious practices so that people could really practice and give praise to whatever deities or gods that they believed in. The king also made Amun, which was the god of air, kind of the most universally accepted god at that time as well. At this time, King Tut also had a name change from his birth name, which kind of embodied the living image of the sun god, and he changed his name to something that more empowered the air gods, but he's more normally known as Tutankhamun, so that's how I'm going to be calling him throughout the rest of the video. Just kind of a little fact that I thought was interesting. I think it's really cool that King Tut didn't really keep religion as it was, as his father had it. He kind of just opened it up and let people decide what they wanted to worship. He had the god of air as kind of the most universally accepted god, but he didn't punish people or cut off other practices, which I thought was really interesting. King Tut also made sure that the completion of the Solab, which were these big giant granite lion statues, as well as the Karnak temple, were worked on and completed during his time in power. So King Tut's father had moved the capital city around from one place to another, and King Tut just decided that it would be better back in its original spot, so that's what they decided on. It's really crazy that even though King Tut, of course, had different people helping him, advising him, that kind of thing, that he was able to take over as king and just do so much good for Egypt in kind of a short amount of time. He was only in power for about a decade before he ultimately passed away, which I think is just crazy. Like I just mentioned, Tutankhamun unfortunately passed away at the age of 19 after only about a decade in power as the pharaoh of Egypt. So since they obviously weren't planning for the young king to die so suddenly, there wasn't time for a real proper burial, and they didn't even have a proper tomb dug out for him yet because he was so young. Since the death was so unexpected, they also didn't have anyone in line to take over for King Tut. And so I quickly picked up where King Tut left off and took the place as pharaoh. After he had been laid to rest in the Valley of Kings, King Tut was soon forgotten, and his statues and monuments were either repurposed or destroyed. So about a century after King Tut had died, the people of Egypt were constructing a tomb for Ramses VI, and unfortunately the construction of that buried King Tut's tomb even deeper than it already was, leaving it even more inaccessible for people to find. That is until 1922. English archaeologist Howard Carter, with the help of Lord Caravan, actually were able to uncover King Tut's tomb. So the excavation process and kind of the steps leading up to finding King Tut's tomb are kind of outside the scope of this video, but if you're interested, I would suggest looking it up. For about 2 years, Carter picked away at the tomb until he was able to find King Tut himself. King Tut was buried within 3 coffins. The outer 2 coffins were just wood that were covered in hammered down gold, and the innermost coffin was made out of solid gold. Once they were able to get inside the 3 coffins, they found a completely gold mask covering King Tut's body. Over King Tut's shoulders was a gold mask with his likeness, and many pieces of jewelry and amulets were surrounding him as well. Around the coffins were 4 hammered gold shrines covered in detailed writing and pictures. The surrounding rooms were filled to the brim with furniture, chariots, jewelry, clothes, staff, so many different things. It was crazy, all the different things that they were able to uncover within the tomb. These items were placed within the tomb because it was thought that these items would follow you into the afterlife. So you would need all of these items so that you could have a very comfortable life in the afterworld. The site took Carter and his other archaeologists about 10 years to catalog and sort, which is crazy. That just shows how many different kinds of pieces were within King Tut's tomb. And if you're interested, many of these pieces are still within the Egyptian Museum in Cairo. So let's uncover some of the interesting theories that people have behind the young king's death. Why did he die at such a young age? Of course, the life expectancy was a bit younger, but people lived beyond their 20s in ancient Egypt. So let's talk about what happened. Spoilers, we don't really know exactly what happened, and we might never know. As our technology and science advances, we might uncover some more pieces that might help us understand what really happened, but as of right now, all of these are just theories. So one of the earliest theories of King Tut's death is that he was murdered. After uncovering his body and taking a closer look at it, archaeologists realized that he had probably suffered from a blow to the head that killed him. However, this theory was ruled out by most people. During the process of burying, excavation, just being underground for so long, the body can change and move, and so they think that what they saw as maybe a blow to the head could have just been the body changing and moving after death. Another theory is that King Tut was actually fatally injured in a chariot accident. So his body had evidence that he had broken his femur and pelvis shortly before his death, as it wasn't healed after he was buried. Some think that he could have developed an infection due to his injury, and that is what caused his death. As I mentioned before, there was a chariot buried in his tomb with him, as well as many depictions on the walls of the tomb of King Tut riding in a chariot. So it seems as if chariot riding was something that he did very often. And so that's a theory about maybe why he was buried with a broken bone. What I think is the most interesting theory, and one that I had never heard of before, was the spontaneous combustion theory. In 2013, Egyptologists took CT scans and x-rays of King Tut's body and found something really interesting. Based upon the scans as well as little pieces of flesh that they were able to take from the king's body, they found evidence of very weird and very distinct scarring on just one side of his body. Further chemical testing showed that King Tut's body might have spontaneously combusted after his death. Since the oxygen was very limited in the tomb, the fire used up all the oxygen and then the fire went out, which explains why only part of his body was charred or burned. Some theorize that maybe the embalming fluids or the quick, turnaround time that they needed for the embalming process might have been the reason that his body spontaneously combusted. And while this isn't a theory about how King Tut died, I think it just adds to the mystery surrounding King Tut. I just think it's very interesting that King Tut was just kind of a blip on the radar. He only ruled Egypt for a very short time, but for, about 100 years now, we've been able to gain so much information and make his name known again. And this spontaneous combustion theory Whether it's, common among mummies and people that are embalmed this way, I'm not entirely sure. However, it is very interesting, and I think it's important to note as well. The most well-known and most widely believed theory about King Tutankhamun's death is a combination of a few things. So in 2010, there were DNA results as well as CT scans that decided that King Tut actually had something called Kohler's disease. During his life, this disease probably caused him poor circulation and poor blood flow. Additionally, there was evidence as well that King Tut had a clubbed foot and walked with the assistance of a staff or a walking stick. This, in combination with the Kohler's disease, would have made walking and getting around very difficult for King Tut. It was also determined that King Tut, shortly before his death, had come down with a raging case of malaria, which is a huge problem now, but we have some sort of treatment, whereas back in the day, you just got malaria and you had to fight it, and if your immune system couldn't help you, you were basically toast. So a lot of archaeologists, Egyptologists, scientists in general, think that King Tut probably died from a combination of malaria, which maybe was exacerbated by his leg injury and the Kohler's disease. And that's the best idea that people have. Maybe not the most exciting and crazy story about King Tut's death, but I just think it's super interesting that we focus so much on figuring out what happened to King Tut. He's seen as such an iconic person in, Egypt's history as like the young king and the king with the, with the disability and the king that died way too early and things like that. But we don't still really have like a super clear and concise answer about how he died. We can theorize as best as we can, and we can gather more information as technology becomes more readily available. I think it's interesting how history can get literally buried for such a long time, and we can uncover it and still have answers. I really enjoyed learning about King Tut. I hope that you guys enjoyed listening to a little biography and a little conspiracy time about King Tut's death. If you enjoyed this video and if you like this content, please feel free to give it a like and subscribe. As always, I thank you guys very much for watching the videos. It really means a lot. Other than that, I hope you guys have a great rest of your day. Get outside, enjoy the nice weather, keep being the bad bitches that you are. Goodbye, guys.